We talk about breakout players a lot on fantasy football today. How about breakout offenses? Should you just be targeting great offenses, or at least offenses that have a lot of value in average draft position? We're going to talk about that today. Not just the offenses that we want to target, but the ones that we want to avoid on fantasy football today. We also have your emails at fantasyfootball@cbsi.com and your Apple Podcast questions. Please keep leaving us 5-star reviews. And we have hashtag Dan on the can. Dan Schneier is here. What's up, Dan?
Back to reclaim my throne here on the can here. Look, I've been told in the past, look, you need to look into upgrading your background and your setup. And I agree with that. But at the same time, that will end this joke entirely. And that will kind of sometimes you kind of lean into things, Adam. And right now, I'm just kind of riding with it. I'm rolling with it. I'm back on my throne here. It's kind of serves, as everyone knows, multi-purpose throne here. I can record a podcast from it. I can take care of business on this throne over here. So I'm happy to be back, man.
You're taking it a little too far now.
Okay.
Well, Dan is back. He's a little frazzled. He got in very late last night. I understand you were on vacation. I hope it was good. I hope you're refreshed, or you will be maybe refreshed on Monday or something.
Yeah, we'll wait till Monday for the refresh. It's been a frazzled morning, but I'm back. I'm here. I'm excited to talk fantasy football.
So I want to wait for a few more people to get into the chat. I don't know if this is a self-indulgent segment, or I'll let you decide if this is something we should do. I'm on the clock in the Scott Fishbowl, and I will let the audience make a pick for me, or at least help me make a pick.
Wow. That's not something I would ever do. So kudos to you for being, I wouldn't call it self-indulgent. I would say it's selfless.
All right, I'm going to put it in the notes here. Adam,
see if I'm on the clock too. I would hate to miss a pick.
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy. All right, let's get to some news and notes real quick. There's really not much. Jets defensive tackle Quinnen Williams, 4-year, $96 million extension with $66 million guaranteed. He's fantastic. That's good for them. Josh Jacobs intends to skip the beginning of training camp if a long-term deal is not reached. So this week we've had Barkley and we've had Jacobs, and reports about them either skipping camp or skipping week 1, and we'll know more when we talk on Tuesday, because Monday is the deadline for these guys to either come to a long-term agreement with the Raiders and Giants respectively, or either play. The only deal they can get would be the franchise tag, and they either, unless it's rescinded, and then they can play on the franchise tag, or they can not play. They wouldn't be under contract, so if they held out, they wouldn't incur any fines, but we'll know more on Monday or Tuesday. So, I do have an announcement to make, but I have to talk to Zach, our producer, Zach Brooks. I'm gonna send him a private message here, because I forgot to ask him about something podcast league related before the show started. So while I do that, Dan, why don't you tell us about the content that we have coming out on CBSSports.com in the coming weeks?
Yeah, it's going to start to ramp up here at CBSSports.com. So one thing you've probably noticed we've done on the website editorially for the last, however many years, is a massive amount of mock drafts. So you're going to start to see a mock draft with the full results and a recap from Jamie twice a week, I would say, starting next week. We're going to get maybe once a week for now, and then twice a week starting late July. Next week, we got a PPR mock draft coming out. This past week, we had a Dynasty mock draft that Heath ran. So a ton of analysis around that. We're also going to get into some deep stuff here. We're starting with Jamie's 32 deep sleepers, which is going to debut next week, I believe next Friday, so end of next week. It's one of my favorite pieces of the year, the 32 deep sleepers. Jamie really dives deep, gets into some players that you're going to want to look to target in the last few rounds of your drafts. So get into that as well. We're also going to be having our Sleepers Breakouts Busts series starting next week as well, where each of our guys will do a Sleepers, a Breakouts, and a Bust column. So those are guys you want to target. Those are guys you want to avoid. And those are, again, players you want to look for in the end of your drafts. And then finally, we also have a ton of content coming out that around just previews for teams that Chris Towers is working on. And these are pretty good pieces because they kind of give you the whole glimpse if you miss the offseason. As some people don't like to, Adam, it's not us, probably not the people listening to this podcast right now, but some people don't follow the offseason transactions. I know that a lot of my friends are like, oh, he's on this team right now, he's on that team. So those are good ways, in my opinion, the Towers previews, to kind of get yourself caught up on everything revolving that team, projection, schedule, that type of stuff as well.
All right, I'm going to give you some early ADP observations that I came up with just looking at average draft position, both from June 15th until today, July 14th. So about a month on NFC, which is high stakes leagues, experienced players, but also A little bit close, a little bit shorter of a date range. I looked at some July 1st, just a month of July, about 55 drafts. I think it was something like that. So see what's going on. And I'll tell you more about how to get into the podcast league later on in the show. So let's take a look. Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry are still round 2-3 turn picks. Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, 23rd through 26th in ADP. If you love Ramondre Stevenson, he's 29th. So if you're debating between a running back and a wide receiver with your first pick, if you have a top 3 pick or something like that, just know that you can get, as of right now, Pollard, Jacobs, Henry. They're all available according to the ADP, which means in your league, maybe 2 out of 3, maybe all 3. I think it's tremendous value to get one of those guys that late. Any agreement, disagreement? We can move on, whatever.
I would just say that I like the value with Henry a lot there. The other two scare me a little bit more just because I feel like both players, Jacobs, it's the track record with him. At least with Henry, I know I've gotten a bunch of seasons of him producing at high RB1 levels, and I'm getting him that late, so it does feel like a value. Jacobs less of the case, and then with Ramondre, it's also the similar type situation where, are we using last year's data a little too much? He was 3rd in running back targets, which is incredibly important for me. I'm not so sure that builds this year. It might regress from a target standpoint with that offense really evolving and becoming a much better moving just whole with Bill O'Brien there, which I think is going to take a massive jump. I mean, you go from Matt Patricia and Joe Judge running an offense to Bill O'Brien. It might be the biggest jump of any offense in the entire NFL because those two should have never been coordinating an offense to begin with. So I just don't know if the offenses are the same this year for those players. And Pollard's another player who a little bit too much injury concern for me there coming back off that major injury. So I don't know. I just feel like there's risk baked into these players, even Henry to an extent with the age. So it doesn't feel like it's as much of value to me because I know I'm passing up on a receiver who's a guaranteed guaranteed producer there.
I mean, look, you are passing up on a receiver, but you're passing up on Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, T. Higgins. I could see an argument for them as being better picks than I mean, I don't think they are necessarily. I don't think they are, but I could see an argument that Devontae Smith, Olave, and T. Higgins are better picks than Pollard, Jacobs, and Henry. But after that, you're talking about Mark Andrews. Yep. You're talking about Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, players with warts. So I think at that point, there are question marks about Pollard and Henry and Jacobs, sure. But I think they're at the point in the draft where there are question marks about just about everyone. I think it's very appropriate. I think it's really good value and a chance to get a number 1 running back.
I agree. Let me just wrap up real quick with kind of like where I was driving at, just to kind of bring it back home. So for me, the way I look at it is, as I've done these drafts with you guys, there seems to be those types of gambles that I can make at running back that I like to make at running back in rounds 3 through 5 this year versus past years where they haven't been. Players like J.K. Dobbins, who I love. I mean, we could go on and on with these players. I'd rather take that risk at running back in rounds 3 through 5, specifically 4 and 5, than round 2 or and in some cases round 1 as well.
That's a good point. All right. I know next observation. I know Dan doesn't like Aaron Jones, but 48th overall seems like great value. And that's basically where he's going, Aaron Jones. And he's going ahead of Joe Mixon, which I wouldn't do. Ahead of Dobbins, Madison, Miles Sanders, Cam Akers. That's RB 17 for Aaron Jones. Still out on him there?
I'm out on him there, but I will say this. One thing I do like about Aaron Jones is I took a bit of a deeper dive into this before the podcast because I saw him in the notes. And one thing I like about him is Dave Richard, who obviously all of you know. One thing I love about what Dave does is he pours so many hours into the research for what he does. So on a weekly basis, I've seen his let's just call it like his week-to-week strategy and his research that goes into making weekly lineups and the weekly schedule and things like that. And he puts so much into it. So when I saw his projected strength of schedule rankings, I wanted to take the time to kind of point those out because I know the time he puts in. And Aaron Jones has the best projected schedule of any running back, the easiest, I should say. So that does kind of pique my interest a little bit, Adam, but I'm still so concerned with the major factors there in Green Bay. 1, do I trust this offense with Jordan Love running it? 2, if I don't trust the offense with Jordan Love with it, how am I getting points from Aaron Jones? 3, are those points coming in the red zone because then he has to take a bigger role from A.J. Dillon there? Are those points coming in the passing game, because then I have to trust Jordan Love to throw to a running back, which is unknown, uncertain, and in my mind isn't going to happen very much this year, because I think he's going to run with the ball, or I think he's going to, get the ball out fast to his first progression, even if it's not the right move there, because that's what we tend to see from young quarterbacks who don't have a lot of experience in the NFL. So I just don't know where all the production is coming from with Jones. I know he's a big name, and I know you can look at things that make sense. Like, you even put it in the notes, like, look at this. We're getting a guy who's finished, in all the, top 24 and all these
top 12, top 12,
top 12, 11, 13, 5,
years.
3. Right.
And
all
then
those years were with Aaron Rodgers, though. Right. And
with Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, he's also been second on the team in targets 4 straight seasons
with Aaron Rodgers.
But also with Matt LaFleur, who we've seen that in previous Matt LaFleur stops as well. So I still think he's going to be involved in the passing game. But all right, let's go to our next
passing game. Will come. It's just a matter of the touchdowns that scare me the most.
Since July 1st, Dalvin Cook is RB16 and Alexander Mattison is RB20, and Madison's going in the 6th round. 6th round for Madison would be tremendous. I think for us, he's going to be more like a 4th round pick. But who would you take first, Cook or Madison?
I like both a lot at ADP. I just took Madison in the Scott Fish Bowl. I was hoping Cook would make it back on the comeback. He did not. I think I would take Madison first. Obviously, I just did that. I feel like Madison's going very undervalued right now and underdrafted right now, considering the role that's so likely there. Look, I like Ty Chandler a lot as a prospect. I like Dwayne McBride, but these are day 3 type prospects, and there's just no way Minnesota is going to trust them for big roles this year, in my mind at least. So Madison really feels locked into one of the best roles in fantasy football right now, on an offense that I feel incredibly confident about. And I don't know how many, we'll get to this a little bit later in the show, but there's like a handful of offenses I feel confident about going into this year that will definitely be scoring on a weekly basis. Minnesota is one of them for a variety of reasons, mostly the play calling and the situation with the skill talent and the fact that I don't love their defense right now, which I think helps the offense. So all those factors combined for me to make Madison one of the best values in fantasy. So I'm definitely buying at that price. Like, I would rather have Madison than Aaron Jones personally.
Okay.
And it's not close.
I'd rather have Madison than Cook. We just don't know where Cook's going to end up. I think.
Would you rather Madison or Jones?
I guess Madison.
Right?
Yeah, but I mean, he's bad. He has been. His metrics are terrible over the last 2 years. I don't know that he's bad. He hasn't had a ton of work.
Right.
But he's had a lot of games where he's been really good, and it's been against Detroit. They've had a horrible run defense. It got better last year, but he didn't really play last year because Cook stayed healthy. So I think, for the guy, for Schneier, who criticizes me for drafting Myles Gaskin and who was the other guy? So Mike Davis.
It was a back-to-back of like Gaskin.
I actually
Davis.
Never did.
I'll find it.
Making that up, Madison does give me a little bit of the willies in terms of that, but he has a ton of, he has a ton of, sorry, I was distracted by a comment that I'm about to read. He has a ton of upside. Was distracted by this. Just don't get this a lot. Adam, you're a great host, but you look like an antelope. Okay. Oh, and he's killing you too. Wow, DeForest with a really. So, do you think
I don't know why I get the Milton stapler? Obviously, I know that reference, Adam. I don't know many things, but I have seen Office Space a bunch of times. So, what is it? Have you seen my stapler? My
sting line.
Question. I'm gonna burn it. I'm gonna burn this place down.
If I look like
I don't know what an antelope. Yeah, I don't know what that is.
I don't know if you saw my tweet. This is the picture my son drew of me yesterday. What do you think of that?
Oh my God!
All right,
he's a real original Picasso over there.
Yeah, he's 4. But all right, let's move on here. In my opinion, there are 18 quarterbacks who have a chance to be real difference makers this year. As I look at ADP, the top 18. If you count Kyler Murray, then I would say there are 19. But I think this is an important number if you're in a super flex league, because the last 4 quarterbacks, 15 through 18 in this range, are Richardson, Goff, Rodgers, and Russell Wilson. The next 5 are Carr, Jordan Love, Stafford, Pickett, and Kyler Murray. And then after that, Sam Howell. Sam Howell scored 20 fantasy points in his one start, and he rushed for 35 yards and a touchdown, and he rushed for 828 yards in his last year in college. Maybe you can make a case for him. I'm not saying that the guys behind that can't be fine, but I'm talking about real difference makers, the steal of your draft. I think there are 18 of them. Maybe Kyler Murray is 19. I just don't expect Kyler Murray to be Kyler Murray when he comes back. So if you're in a super flex league, I wouldn't want to go past 18 if possible for my second quarterback. We'll move on. One more take. People really like Chigakonkwo. He is tight end 11 in average draft position. He is 10 picks after Pat Freiermuth and 8 picks after David Njoku. And Chigakonkwo is ahead of Dalton Schultz, Greg Dulcich, Cole Kmet, Tyler Higbee, and Dalton Kincaid. Certainly deserves to be ahead of some of those guys. I don't know if he deserves to be ahead of all of them. But, I've gotten some comments because tight end premium for Scott Fishbowl. Oh, just take Okonkwo later. So people definitely are buying into Okonkwo. There's a lot to like there. Do you think he should be a top 12 tight end?
I think it's borderline for me. I have a few guys that I prefer over him in that range. One of them, who's more of a risk, and he goes after him in every draft, is Dalton Kincaid. I know all the stats and all the research says don't draft a tight end as a rookie. Very unlikely to be a fantasy football producer. But, we're talking about a large sample size of players who were mostly not drafted in round 1. There's very few of those players were tight ends who were drafted in round 1. I know there have been busts who have drafted in round 1, especially of late. So there's a ton of recency bias. There's also been some producers as of late. In 2017, Evan Ingram was a first-round pick at tight end. He was productive as a rookie. And I think that's the type of season we'll get from Dalton Kincaid with a few more touchdowns. So I like Kincaid more. The problem with me with Okonkwo, Adam, is this. I don't necessarily think that offense with Tannehill back is going to operate, I should say, the same, fully healthy, the same way it operated at the end of the year when Okonkwo kind of caught fire. I think this offense will kind of operate more through Treylon Burks. And if that's the case, with obviously Derrick Henry still carrying most of the load there, if that's the case, I just feel like the volume won't be there for Okonkwo. He'll still be the guy who kind of breaks off a 20 or 30 yarder every game or so, but I'm not so sure the volume will be there for him to be a consistent fantasy producer.
All right, we're going to talk about our favorite offenses in a bit. Right now, it's time for Adam Makes a Pick. All right, I am on the clock.
Can I hear your options too?
Yeah, sure. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is round 10 in
What's your team so far?
All right, Super Flex League. It's PPR and it's point per first down for running backs and wide receivers, but it's double that for tight ends. 2 points for receptions, 2 points for first down. So.
And one more thing to throw in there, Adam. I don't know if you said this week.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, might be thinking
0.25 for carry.
Yeah, exactly. What Adam was about to say is it just the be all net all here is running backs are actually more valuable than receivers in this format by a considerable margin.
And receivers fall. So
because of that,
I have Lawrence and Wilson. Lawrence and Russell Wilson.
I love Lawrence this year.
Oh, you're gonna like my team because I have a lot of Jaguars.
No, I said you love Lawrence this year.
Oh, I do. Yeah. I have ETN. I have Eckler, ETN, AJ Dillon, and Khalil Herbert. I have CeeDee Lamb and Calvin Ridley, and I have David Njoku.
I like this team.
Yeah, I like it. It's solid. So my next pick, as you can see, I have 4 running backs and 2 wide receivers.
You need a receiver bad.
I do. I'm up again in 3 picks because I have the 11th pick. So then it'll be Jeff Haverlack making 2 picks. I think I know who I want to take. So I was debating between Khalil Herbert and Samaje Perine in the 9th round. 20 picks later, Samaje Perine is still there, or 22 picks later, or whatever it is. So he's my top pick right now.
You're going to take a 5th running back?
I am. I'll probably be done with running back for a while. And since I'm drafting in 2 picks, the problem is I'm probably going to end this draft with only 2 quarterbacks instead of 3, or maybe I'll get lucky and get like a crappy guy later. But I'll just spend a lot of fab after there's an injury and get some decent backup, like a Taylor Heineke from last year or something. Okay. So I could either go with like a Dalton Kincaid, or it's going to be Perine if it's a running back without question. Or I've got on the board at wide receiver, I've got Gabe Davis, by far my favorite.
Okay.
Cortland Sutton, Juju, Michael Thomas, Jonathan Mingo a little bit later. So I would say it's Gabe Davis, Cortland Sutton, Michael Thomas, Samaje Perine.
Well, I'm interested to ask you about the Sutton situation from your perspective. So
let's get some.
Let's get some.
I'm gonna put okay. So it's Perine, Gabe Davis, Sutton, Michael Thomas.
Well,
Let's see
Adam's
what
going
the
old
votes
school. He's
are.
writing with a pen and paper right now.
Oh, I have a typo. Anyway, yeah, so those are my options. And I'm going to remember I'm up in 3 picks. So considering there are 3 receivers that I like there, I think I'm just going to take P. Ryan, but see what people say. Go ahead.
On the Sutton front, so last year he was obviously one of your most targeted players. I think he probably one of your most drafted players. I remember you regularly taking him in the 3rd, 4th round range and just feeling like the breakout was coming. So this year, obviously, you could get him at this massive discount. You just talked about it. This is what, round 10 that you're in?
We're like 100.
And obviously, it's a format that does put running backs over receivers, but even so, he's not an auto pick for you. So on Sutton, where do you stand this going into this year? It's just a situation where last year you were excited about the volume potential with all the reports and his rapport with Russell, and this season you're kind of like seeing that play out, or you're just down on the talent. Where are you at with Sutton this year?
Yeah, so I think that he still has a chance to be a red zone guy, make some deep catches. Going into last year, I mean, I thought it wasn't clear that Judy was a better player. There was some, when Judy was on the field, Cortland Sutton did this and did nothing. And that was in 2021. But my theory was, okay, this is a new quarterback. I don't care what happened with these garbage quarterbacks and different coaching staff beforehand. I think Russell Wilson, Sutton felt like the kind of guy that Russell Wilson would lean on. All the reports were indicating the same thing. And in fact, that is exactly what happened in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. He got a lot of targets, got end zone targets, just couldn't produce. After that, it was all Judy. I think Wilson was like, all right, I think I've had enough of this Sutton experiment. Let's just get the ball to Judy. It's clear that Judy took over as the main guy, and that's where you should stand right now in fantasy. But if I'm projecting the Broncos offense to take a step forward, I think Sutton's going to have to be a part of that. So I do think he could be, a top 24. That'd probably be his best outcome. 20 to 24, something like that kind of player. 1,050 yards, 7-8 touchdowns, similar to what Brandon Ayuk did last year, where he was a top, I think he was like wide receiver 16 overall, but he was wide receiver 25 per game. So I don't think Sutton is a useless player. I think he'll be on the field a ton. And if the offense takes a jump, he will definitely take a jump too.
Okay.
Like P. Ryan is the pick here. So I'm going to go ahead.
You're going P. Ryan?
Yeah, I'm going to take P. Ryan. I'm really happy about that. And hopefully Gabe Davis will be there in 3 picks. If not, Michael Thomas will probably be my pick. All right. Dan, let's take a break. And wait. Big news coming up on the podcast league after a break right now on Fantasy Football Today. You want in the podcast league? You've got your chance right now. Go to tinyurl.com/FFT donate. tinyurl.com/FFT donate. A spot in the podcast league is up for auction, and you have only 6 days left to bid on it. This is our 14-team podcast league, and I'll tell you right now, the draft is Monday night, August 28th. Let me just confirm that. Monday, August 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Monday, August 28th, 8 p.m. Eastern. Get in the podcast league with me, with Dave, with Jamie, with Heath, with other FFT listeners. This one's been going on for now. This is our 11th year. So the current high bid is $512. You should pony up, but it's all going to St. Jude. tinyurl.com/FFT donate. You've got 6 days left. Join the podcast league. Dan, let's get to what we were going to talk about today. Unfortunately, we're not having a doctor on today to talk anything medical. We're going to reschedule that. So we had to pivot today. I know I said we were going to do that today. We're going to pivot today to offenses we're targeting, and we already did the ADP stuff. So who are the offenses that you're targeting, Dan?
Yeah, so I wanted to look at this as like offenses to target, offenses to avoid. So the first offense, and based on value, I think that's the fun way to do it. Like we can talk about the Chiefs and Eagles, Adam. I think everybody's targeting players from those offenses, so I'm going to go a little bit beyond that. So the first one that really stands out to me as an offense I'm targeting, and I knew I was going to target this offense the whole offseason, Adam. And obviously now the ADPs are kind of catching up, so it's not as good value. But the Cleveland Browns offense to me is the clear-cut best offense to target in fantasy this year based on value. So let me get into a few reasons, but start with something that I mentioned earlier that I really do put a good amount of weight on, and that's Dave Richards' projected strength of schedule. Because again, he's using different factors to come up with this. It's not just the typical strength of schedule. He's using things like Pro Football Focus grades, advanced stats, things of that nature. And according to Dave, the Browns have the 5th easiest projected strength schedule for quarterbacks, 8th easiest for running backs, 5th easiest for receivers, 3rd easiest for tight ends. Really all in a good spot across the board there from a scheduling standpoint. and from an opponent standpoint. Reasons I like this offense beyond that, Deshaun Watson in year 2, they did everything, in my opinion, that they should do to make him have a chance to really get back to that form we saw in Houston. For starters, they put 2 new weapons around him, both of who I love. The first is Eli Moore, a player whose film at Ole Miss was as good as any receiver, really most receivers in the majority receivers in the last 2 draft classes. Didn't work out in the Jets, played a lot with Zach Wilson. Open rate was still really good for him. He even had a big stretch during his rookie season where he looked like a fantasy stud. He's going to provide something different for that Browns offense, speed and the ability to create open separation early in the routes. Then you got Cedric Tillman, who can run the vertical plane as well as anyone I saw in last year's draft class. He's a rookie, so don't expect too much there, but he's a big-bodied vertical threat that's going to also work well with Deshaun Watson. Reminds me a lot of when they brought in, gave him Will Fuller over there and different weapons in Houston that can get open on the vertical plane, and that's really where Deshaun Watson in Houston really impressed me the most, just that ability to throw with anticipation and accuracy on the vertical plane. So I like that. I like the changes they've made just on the offensive line. They've provided some upgrades there. They're going to get healthier there. Stefanski's back, and I think he has that run-first reputation, but I think this offense is transitioning to a pass-first offense, so you kind of get year 1 of that where, the whole fantasy community knows them one way, the Browns, is this run-first team, and they might be a little bit different this year. So there's a lot to like for me with Cleveland, but some of my favorite late-round flyers are Eli Moore and Cedric Tillman. Nick Chubb, who we're going to talk about a little bit later because I saw it in the email, is one of my favorite targets at running back. I just got him in the Scott Fish Bowl as well. And then Deshaun Watson's probably my favorite value at quarterback. And even, if you're looking late at tight end and you kind of skip the position, David Njoku is kind of interesting as well from that standpoint too, because Deshaun Watson has found some success with some really, really bad tight ends during his time in Houston. You look at some of the guys that he made somewhat fantasy relevant, at least for like flyer type pickups. And these are guys who are not even in the NFL anymore. So I really like this offense. That's the first one for me, Adam.
That was one of mine. I mean, I'll let you kind of go into this. This is the segment that you came up with. But the 4 that I highlighted of value offenses, because like you said, it's not just about the best offenses. It's about the ones where we can find some value in drafts. Cleveland was certainly one of them. I will say, obviously, Denver for me. I've talked about that every day. I'll say Dallas, because I think Pollard in late 2nd or 3rd round is I think unbelievable value. I drafted him 11th overall in one league. I consider him a star, a potential star. I could consider him a stud. Lamb is fine, but Dak Prescott, he's pretty overlooked. And, he didn't really have that great of a year last year, and he was still a top 10 quarterback per game. So I don't think he's going to win you the league, but he has shown the ability to throw for close to 5,000 yards. And again, I don't think that's happening, but I think he's a fine pick. So there's Dak, and then there's Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is maybe done, but he's going pretty late, and I do think he's good value. And then who knows? Maybe there's a tight end that emerges there. They usually get the tight ends pretty involved. So Dallas is one, Denver is one, Cleveland is one, and Jacksonville. Jacksonville will probably be my favorite. They don't have a single player right now going in the first 3 rounds, but then in the 4th round, you got to get aggressive with Jacksonville. That's when Etienne, Ridley, and Trevor Lawrence, according to NFC ADP, are all coming off the board. I think Lawrence probably goes a little bit later than that in a typical draft, but I think that's fine. I think Kirk can be good. I think Ingram can be fine, but I just see this offense having a real chance to blow up. And Doug Peterson, they were only 16th in plays last year, but in his 5 years in Philadelphia, they were 3rd, 8th, 1st, and 6th in plays.
And it stands to reason that in year 2 of the system, they'll feel more comfortable using more tempo.
Yeah, and I think I wish their left tackle weren't suspended for 6 games.
Me too.
But the arrow's pointing up for Jacksonville, and the value's good. All right, who else do you like?
All right, a few more offenses I like. Let's start with the Lions here. The Lions are definitely an offense I'm looking to target a lot of going into the season. For starters, I'm a big believer, if you've heard me on this podcast, in the offensive coordinator and the role that the play calling and play design plays in fantasy football success. And Ben Johnson, to me, is as good as it gets. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 other guys, obviously Andy Reid, that I would take over him, and a few others maybe. But the way that offense was cooking at the end of last year, I think it carries right over. There's no concerns with the offensive line. It remains elite. Young players as well in that offensive line that could grow into even better players. Like I don't know if I've seen the best of Penei Sewell. I don't think I have. I think that comes this year. Even Frank Ragnow is a pretty young player there, probably the best center in the NFL or one of the 3 best there. So I really like the offensive line situation. I like adding Jameson Williams. The speed, obviously, we have to miss the 6 games, but then he comes back into the mix there. Jahmyr Gibbs as well adds a speed element to that offense and gives them the ability to do something they tried to do a little bit of last year, which is get the running backs involved in the passing game. But obviously, DeAndre Swift made that difficult with the injuries and the inconsistencies. This year, that could potentially be different. And they've even mentioned, I think it was I don't think it was Ben Johnson, but it might have been him who mentioned that even David Montgomery, they feel like offers a little bit more in the passing game than somebody like Jamal Williams that they had last year. So I think that could really unlock the offense as well. So Lions are definitely an offense I'm targeting. I like Goff at his ADP. Gibbs is interesting to me, but I love David Montgomery at his ADP. And Amon-Ra St. Brown to me is still one of the best targets in fantasy. Obviously, I had a huge amount of shares in him last year. You have to pay a much bigger premium this year for him, but I don't really see why you don't pay it because you're getting locked in my opinion, 140 plus targets if he stays healthy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put the Lions in there.
I don't like him ahead of Davante Adams, though, and that's currently happening in a lot of
I do like him ahead of Davante Adams, but why? So I guess track record is probably the reason you don't like that happening.
It's not even close. I mean, you have to really look. It could obviously happen, especially if Garoppolo's arm falls apart or something like that. But like Davante Adams is Davante Adams, for God's sake. He's a Hall of Famer. Amon-Ra St. Brown is not he's extremely short area target. Wants to go downfield a little bit more this year, but I don't know if that's how he's going to be used. Doesn't do a lot after the catch, doesn't score touchdowns. I'm not trying to trash Amon-Ra St. Brown, but it feels like overthinking it to me to take him ahead of Davante Adams. Although I think you can make the case that St. Brown is safer than Davante Adams. But the only format that I would even consider it is PPR. If it's non or half PPR, I think you got to go Adams. But I just feel like even in a terrible quarterback situation, Adams is still going to be good.
It's fair, especially because I feel like if I don't listen to your advice on that, Adam, I'm making the same mistake I made last year with a player like Adam. I really did not expect that Raiders offense to move the ball last year very often, and they did. And I think some of the credit belongs to Josh McDaniels, who's still there. I know he takes a lot of crap, but he still is a good play designer, and he still is a good play caller. And so if that's the case, I feel a little bit more confident. I just have so many, and we even saw it with Jarrett Stidham when he played a little bit. The offense still moved the ball. Davante Adams was still productive. I just have a weird bias, I guess, against Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't see it happening for him.
He knows he's familiar with the system, and
familiar with the system. That's a good thing.
Mac Jones was actually putting up decent numbers for a young quarterback in his first 2 seasons, and I think it was Chris Trapasso who's breaking down all of the young quarterbacks on our website. And he either said on this show or he wrote in an article, he wasn't really buying Mac Jones because he felt like Josh McDaniels was the reason behind the stats, basically. And you're right. Josh McDaniels deserves more credit than he gets as a play caller, play designer. He's done good stuff. And, I think that's worth noting.
And to be fair, oh yeah,
go another team. Yeah, because we're running out of time here. We got to get to our emails and our Apple Podcast.
Yep. So let's do one more team that wasn't on the list. For me, it's not any big surprise, but I know a lot of people are kind of feel like it's a math equation that's hard to solve, so they don't want to take these players, but I'm targeting a lot of 49ers again this year. One thing I really love about the 49ers going into this year, this is the easiest schedule they've faced in a long time. According to Dave's projected strength of schedule, we've got the 7th easiest schedule for quarterbacks, 9th easiest running back, 7th easiest receivers, 9th easiest tight end. So I feel like that's going to make things a lot more fluid for them from an offensive standpoint, a lot more consistent there. And so, you look at some of these players. Brandon Ayuk is a player who I love at ADP. Deebo Samuel is a player who I think his ADP is depressed. I'm not so sure that there's good reason.
It's not that depressed. He's a solid third, maybe into the 4th round guy.
That's pretty depressed for where he was at. I know there's an issue with targets there.
It was something that we nailed last year. We called him a bust.
Right.
And you know what? We're going to get into this later.
Okay.
Really interesting, the Ayuk versus Deebo stuff. Summary, over the last year and a half, Ayuk has been decidedly better as a receiver. But Brock Purdy appears to be a much better fit for Deebo Samuel. So anyway, that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for 49ers, that was kind of it there. And then the final team that I'm looking to target would be another team that's obviously one of the better teams, but I really like some of the values ADP wise for the Bills this year. The three specific ones for me are James Cook, who I don't understand why he's still going so late. I get it. They signed Damian Harris, but James Cook looks so good down the stretch. And everything I saw on tape from him at Georgia told me that he could be a really good in between the tackles runner. He's the same thing his brother Dalvin has. It's those vision cuts, it's that ability to see the cutback lanes. It's an innate ability that I don't think all running backs have. I think he has it. I'm going to stick with that. Dalton Kincaid, I mentioned him earlier, but I love Dalton Kincaid as one of my favorite tight end flyers. Look, everyone's going to bank on this idea that tight ends as rookies don't produce, but very few, again, were first-round picks with the kind of talent Kincaid has and the quarterback that he has attached to him. And then finally, Gabe Davis, who you mentioned earlier. There's you can get him at such a discount this year, Gabe Davis, and I still think you're likely to get really good snap shares from him in this Bills offense, which is big. And more importantly, he might be healthy for the whole year, which would give him a better chance, in my opinion, to produce on a consistent basis. So I think you're getting good value with all three of those players.
Well, I'm one pick away from getting Gabe Davis and Scott Fish.
Okay.
So
Nice.
Let's hope. All right. Play offenses that we are avoiding.
Oh, yeah.
I actually didn't really have a lot of these because I felt like the offenses that I'm avoiding have players who are really discounted in fantasy. But one team I would say is Washington. I could see them being horrible. And I could see them being very run heavy because I think that's what Ron Rivera wants to do. And they've got a offensive coordinator who has not called plays and a quarterback who's made one career start. They do have a lot of talent. I don't know if they have a lot of talent. I think they've got two talented wide receivers, like two, above average talent NFL wide receivers. I don't think the running backs are really anything special necessarily. So they're not that good. Washington's a team I'm avoiding except for Dotson. Dotson is a guy that I think is a player to target. How about you? Who are you avoiding?
Some teams I'm avoiding at ADP, and remember, we're not just going to name like the worst offenses here because we're trying to factor in ADP. So one of the first ones for me that comes to mind, I know it's different, a little bit different from where you were at with this, Adam, but the Cowboys for me at ADP are just a team that I just don't really like or want to get much of. I am very nervous about this transition from Kellen Moore to, I guess, Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer calling the offense. I just don't like the design that Mike McCarthy has in his offense, and I think it's going to take some time anyway to get on track. And I know he says he's going to use some of the more concepts, the Kellen Moore concepts, but we'll see. The one thing we know is going to happen is the tempo is going to slow the hell down for the Cowboys, and we're talking about a team that was 1-2-2-1 in the last 4 years in offensive tempo. If that drops to 15th or 16th, we're losing a lot of plays there on offense, and that scares the hell out of me. For Dak Prescott, who you mentioned, like, I'm kind of fine with him at his ADP, but I don't see any real value there. I don't see any upside there. Tony Pollard to me is propped up based on, projection and based on small sample size and not factoring the injury. CeeDee Lamb, I wouldn't really take at ADP. Don't love the value there either.
What? You wouldn't?
Yeah.
What's wrong with CeeDee Lamb?
Again, I'm down on this entire offense here, especially because I feel like
they were very run heavy last year. I mean, that's the thing. We act like they're going from this team that threw the ball all over the place. I mean, Prescott didn't even have that good of a year. Yeah, and
it's not just the run heavy, though. The tempo for me is such a big factor here in fantasy football. We're going from a team that was just moving, trying to get plays into a team that's going to be, let's make sure we try to win this football game. Let's take all the play clock off. Let's run the ball in this spot. Let's throw the ball short in this spot.
They did run the ball a lot last year, a ton. And Dak, look, CeeDee Lamb is so much better than every receiver on that team. He's a fantastic football player. And
I like CeeDee Lamb. It's just like
the line is once again going to be a huge strength. So I think you're overthinking it with the Cowboys, with Lamb anyway. I mean, I could see like Pollard, it is a small sample size and he has to prove that he can hold up. Lamb to me feels like one of the safer players in football.
We can revisit it, and I think Lamb's like a fine pick at his ADP. That's what I said. I didn't say he's like a bad value or anything. He's a fine pick at his ADP, just not the one I would take in that spot. Okay. But there's just factors here that the one I mentioned, and then the second thing is like, we're going from I know we don't want to put too much into this, Adam, but there is something to be said about playing the entire AFC South last year and the NFC North, which had horrible defenses littered throughout both divisions, and then going to play the divisions, the West, and I'm blanking on the and the AFC East, the NFC West, AFC East this year. Like, according to Dave's projected strength of schedule, again, Cowboys are facing the 25th hard, 25th easiest schedule against quarterbacks. That's hard. 24th running backs, 25th receivers, 20th tight ends. Like, there's a big difference there in the schedule going into this year versus last year. I don't like this offense at all for fantasy.
Okay. All right, just let's wrap up. Give me just real quick.
One more quick one as a sleeper pick, just because I see a lot of high ADPs here. It's the Jets. Look, the ADP is super high for Breece Hall, despite him coming back from an ACL and what we know about that. Garrett Wilson's ADP skyrocketing. Those are the two that really stand out to me here as question marks, because I just don't buy this definitely being a great offense yet with the question marks they have at offensive tackle. Mekhi Becton's supposed to be back. Really hasn't played much. From what I heard, that knee injury is not easy to come back from. They're counting on like a 38-year-old Dwayne Brown who was injured a lot entire career and injured last year. If both of those guys get hurt again or don't produce, I have no idea what they're going to do at tackle, and I have no idea how an NFL team can produce on offense without tackle. We saw what it did to the Chargers offense last year when they went through that stretch of having to lose both their starting offensive tackles. And the Jets face a really tough schedule, 28th easiest, so 4th hardest against for quarterbacks, 25th, 28th, 30th for running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. Really difficult draw for them schedule-wise. So those question marks to me make me think, like, why are we propping up these Jets skill, like for Wilson and Breece Hall specifically? Like, this is an offense that has already produced at a high level. This is an offense that has already been super fantasy successful. I think it's because Aaron Rodgers is attached to it, but I just don't know if that's enough.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, Garrett Wilson had a very productive rookie season.
But look how high he's going in ADP now.
Yeah, I know. I think it's fairly justified.
Okay.
Ideally, he'd be a late second round pick instead of a mid or even in the third round. Look, I think if you're nervous about that, Chris kind of said this a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Maybe there shouldn't be such a big gap between Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And let's say you're picking in the middle of the second round, then you want Garrett Wilson. You might want to just pass over him and try to get Olave next. If Olave's not there, maybe you get T. Higgins, something like that. Because Olave was better in every measure. He was better than Garrett Wilson last year. And yeah, I think the argument for Wilson is certainly, and I would take Wilson over Olave. It's Rodgers and a number one receiver. It's one of the most sure things in fantasy football. And Wilson should be a tremendous football player, but I think Olave's got a lot going for him too. So it's not bad if you want to wait around and take a different wide receiver. Let's take a break. And we got emails and Apple Podcast questions after this. Our email address is fantasyfootball@cbsi.com. And here's our first one. It comes from Matt. Why the big gap between Christian Kirk and Brandon Ayuk? Kirk in 2022 had 84 catches, 1,108 yards, 8 touchdowns. Ayuk, 78 catches, 1,015 yards, 8 touchdowns. Changes from 2022 to 2023. Kirk adds Ridley. Ayuk adds no pass catching threat. Now, Matt goes on to talk about how he is a 49ers fan. He likes that Ayuk is going into a contract year, and that was great for Kittle. It was great for Debo. They both had huge games, huge seasons in contract years. Ayuk has played 100% of his games the past 2 years. He's been very healthy, very durable. So why the big gap between Kirk and Ayuk?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big gap comes down to the fact that most people just assume that the 49ers have too many mouths to feed and it's a run-first offense, but I'm with Matt here. I would take Ayuk over Christian Kirk. I have him ranked higher. I think one thing you mentioned earlier that was interesting, the gap, the difference in the split stats with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel over the most recent stretch of games kind of coincides with exactly when Brandon Ayuk got out of Kyle Shanahan's doghouse. And I've read story about this, and the story was essentially that Ayuk in San Francisco, it's a different breed. Like when you practice, you're expected to block at every single position. When you put that on tape, they go over it in the film meetings. And if you're a wide receiver and you're dogging it as a blocker in that run scheme, you're not going to play much and you're not going to get targets. And so when he got out of that doghouse, it's because he started delivering as a blocker. And Ayuk's actually one of the best wide receiver blockers in the NFL, according to, Pro Football Focus, if you follow that, but also the tape. And so once that started happening, he started getting a lot more targets and he started getting a lot more involved in the offense. And so I think that will continue on. And Ayuk has become that player. On film, he's one of the best separators in the NFL. You can look at Matt Harmon's reception perception data to see how well he creates against man coverage, which is extremely important in the NFL. So I think he's a much better actual NFL receiver than Christian Kirk. I think the opportunities will continue to come. And so I'm with Matt here. I wouldn't consider Kirk over him.
I would not. I would definitely take Kirk over Ayuk.
Kirk
So
scares the hell out of me. That's a math problem for me. Where are those targets coming from?
he's their slot. So look, I could see it. I totally see your point. He's their slot guy. That is his role. 2/3 of his snaps came out of the slot. So I think he's got that role and that benefits him. Calvin Ridley's going to hurt, no question. But from my standpoint, the Jaguars threw for only about 100 more yards than the 49ers last year. That's where the biggest difference is. The harm of Calvin Ridley joining the fold is going to be offset by, I'm hoping and expecting, a much more prolific passing offense. I do think when you talk about offenses that could throw for 5,000 yards, this is one of them. That's a lot, and I'm not going to project that or expect that, but I do think that could happen. There's zero chance that's happening for the 49ers, and I think you cannot ignore what happened with Ayuk and Brock Purdy. Now, there were only 4 games where you had Purdy, Ayuk, Kittle, Debo, McCaffrey, all playing more than 50% of the snaps. But in those 4 games, Ayuk was on pace for less than 100 targets. He was on pace for 60 catches, 867 yards, no touchdowns on 98 targets. He had the same amount of targets as Christian McCaffrey. Debo was by far the most targeted player in those 4 games. And 2 of them were playoff games, by the way. And the reason why I don't think you can just dismiss it as a small sample size is that over the last 2 seasons, well, let's just focus on 2023. Ayuk is by far of all the wide receivers or tight ends or running backs who actually get a lot of targets, by far the highest ADOT and the highest route depth. Brock Purdy, I would say, not trying to talk trash here, by NFL standards has a bad arm. He is not going to be throwing the ball downfield. He's not going to be stretching the field. So it's hard to say with all these guys healthy because they're never all healthy. So because of that, Ayuk will probably beat his projections. But as good as this year was last year, he caught 8 touchdowns, I think. He was wide receiver 25. And Purdy had an incredibly high touchdown rate. So I think he's a really good player. I don't think this is the offense for him. I think Purdy is a really bad fit for him. Better for Debo, better for McCaffrey, better for Kittle. And that's why I will take Kirk over Ayuk.
It's fair.
All right, next email is from Joey C. from Las Vegas, who says, we are too low on Nick Chubb. He has to be the most bust-proof running back in the league. Hunt is gone. He'll get all the work now, including dump-offs. I don't understand why you guys aren't higher on him.
Well, I think some people are very high on him. I'm very high on Nick Chubb. He's one of my favorite running backs in fantasy right now. Just drafted him, Scott Fishbowl, as I mentioned earlier. And I agree with really everything that was said. I don't feel like we're factoring in enough the opportunity that he's going to have now with Kareem Hunt there, like gone. They're obviously not going to just feed him like a workhorse because they have him signed under contract and they have other players on that roster at running back who they trust. But I think the biggest difference is the passing game work, which we've already seen start to shine a little bit in OTAs prior to training camp. Hopefully that continues through camp where we start to see reports that continue of, the offense is getting the running backs a little bit more involved by design in the passing game. And Nick Chubb can obviously do it. We've seen him. We know that he has the capability of doing it. So I like it with an improved chance for receiving volume, more goal line or more red zone opportunities just because, you take Kareem Hunt out of the mix, who the Cleveland did use a lot in the red zone. And just feels like a really good spot, especially if, Adam, that offense takes the jump we're expecting them to take with Deshaun Watson in year 2, because then we're talking about more scoring opportunities as well than they've had in recent years.
Yeah, I was not in this. I was not necessarily agreeing with this earlier in the offseason, but I've certainly come around. And
on Chubb,
it is worth pointing out that Kareem Hunt had almost no role the last half of the season. They just were not using him. In the last 12 games, he had 5.5 carries per game. And Chubb had 17 carries per game. And Chubb wasn't really that good for fantasy, but I think that was really because they were getting blown out a lot. The game scripts were bad. So he's clearly one of the best running backs in football and should have a really good role. I'm not sure he gets to even 40 catches, though. Just real quick, how many catches do you think for him?
I think he's going to get 40 plus catches. I think he'll get over that mark.
All right. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button. Thanks. And if you are a fan of me, you should be very happy that I just got Gabe Davis, and I'm super excited about it. What a great feeling when I was seriously considering both P. Ryan and Gabe Davis in rounds 9 and 10.
And then you get him at 11, 12.
Yeah. Is that what it was? 11 and 12? Yeah. I get the third round reversal flips me around, but
Me too.
What a feeling. What a happy Friday, everybody. All right. This is from Towns. Grade the trade. 10-team PPR league. I don't think this could be more of an A+. Jamar Chase and Rondale Moore for Jamar Smith. Jeez. Devontae Smith and Rondale Moore for Jamar Chase.
Oh, yeah. The Chase side crushes this.
A+. This is from Alex. I recently established a Dynasty startup league for a group of managers who are new to Dynasty. What's the best possible configuration for a Dynasty league? How could it be geared towards newer Dynasty managers? Do you support no kicker in DST?
Oh, man, this is a tough question for me because obviously I would prefer to go a different route. But for newer managers who aren't, used to Dynasty, you might want to ease them in. So I would say definitely no kickers, no DST for Dynasty. Obviously, Adam's a big DST and Dynasty kind of guy, but I'm gonna vote against it.
No, it's fine.
No, he's not. He's joking. He mentioned it one time. But I would say just go snake draft for your Dynasty, considering people aren't really familiar with the format and probably aren't ready for a Dynasty auction. Though that is the best way to do it. It's probably not right. So just start with a typical format. I wouldn't even go with Superflex in your situation, since obviously you're trying to get people into Dynasty. But one thing I would consider here is, and I know I've said this before, but
Superflex. Do Superflex.
But for a startup with people who don't know Dynasty?
I think so. I mean, look, it's so easy. And most importantly, if you have a startup Dynasty draft, the first 3 picks, if it's a 1 QB league, the first 3 picks are in some order: Jefferson, Chase, Bijan.
Right.
And, I've said this before, we're not great at knowing what's 2 years from now is going to look at, but those are so easy. Those picks are so easy to make. They're such layups.
Right.
When you go super flex, it's a much smaller advantage. So if you haven't won QB league and your startup Dynasty and you have the 10th pick, you have no chance of getting those top 3. You have no chance of your 4th pick probably. So I think Superflex does even it out a little bit, makes it a more fair startup draft personally.
That's fair. I would say go with that as well, but just keep the settings pretty normal here. I would say definitely have PPR, and make sure for this Dynasty league you set big benches. And I would say one more thing that I would suggest would be to go with best ball format. I think it works better in Dynasty than any other format here.
It probably does. I'm not a huge best ball guy because I love setting lineups. I mean, that's the agony of start sit decisions is a fun part of fantasy. But if you want to go best ball, Dynasty is a great format for it. This is from Greg. I won my league last year. My 2 keepers were going to be Lamar Jackson and Austin Eckler, but with no first round pick, I'm wondering if I should hold Aaron Rodgers over Eckler. It is super flex, and quarterbacks get hoarded in this league. So what do you think? Would you just...
So essentially it's, should I keep Rodgers over Eckler? He said the start would be something like Lamar, Eckler, and a low QB2 like Pickett or Mac Jones, or Lamar, Eckler, and I guess Mixon or Najee, because he's saying if he goes with the Aaron Rodgers route there. I think in super
that's why he confused me. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because I thought it was Rodgers over Eckler, so maybe he meant the second thing would be Lamar Rodgers, not Lamar Eckler, Lamar Rodgers, and a low end situation. So either a Mixon or a Najee type. I think I would actually prefer the Lamar, Eckler, and then the Pickett or Mac Jones. I understand the quarterbacks are getting hoarded, but again, I mentioned this before and I'll mention it again. With Rodgers, he is Aaron Rodgers, but I'm not so sure I see a massive upside here with a bad offensive line and a tough schedule, and no running. He doesn't really run anymore, Aaron Rodgers. So
I'd probably go the Lamar Rodgers Mixon route.
Okay.
Because if Mixon comes back, if he's, himself on the Bengals, he's not that much worse than Eckler. And if you're nervous about that, Najee, there are reasons to like Najee Harris. I think he's actually one of the most interesting players in fantasy this year.
Okay.
And this is from Dave, but I don't think Dan's wrong here. I mean, I guess depends on how much faith you have. How much do you think Rodgers is, how much better is Rodgers than Pickett and Mac Jones? Answer that question and you'll get the answer to your keeper question, Greg.
Right.
All right, this is from Dave. He's trying to hoard. No, I don't think you need to pick up Boston Scott, Dave. I'm sorry to shortchange you, but I want to get to the Apple Podcast questions. I know you're trying to hoard Eagles running backs. It's a dynasty league. It's 10 teams, so anyone with any value should be rostered, basically. But Boston Scott's pretty low on the list. All right, Apple Podcasts questions. This was only a 4-star review. Not cool, but I'll read it anyway.
Wow, you're going to read a 4-star? I got to be honest with everybody listening right now. If you do a 4 instead of a 5, I'm going to make sure I'm going to talk specifically with Adam after this podcast and say those won't be read anymore. You throw a 5 on that. You don't throw a 4. You throw a 5 on, and then you get your question read. It's a pretty simple process. Adam, for some reason, was feeling nice today, but no.
Friday.
5-star podcast. Give it a 5-star review.
5-star Friday. Would you trade Tyreek Hill and the 101 for Jamar Chase and the 1.5 in Dynasty?
Ooh,
no way.
This is a really interesting question because
not in a Bijan year.
Because it's Tyreek Hill and Bijan Robinson for Jamar Chase, and that and is probably like Jackson Smith and Jigba or like Quentin Johnston type of thing. I'm assuming this is a 1 QB league.
Yeah,
I would take the Hill and Bijan side.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. This is from WT Yang.
Okay.
Could you provide more analysis on other formats like non-PPR?
Like standard format. So first of all, you missed the first part of this, which is the best part is I listened to you guys and I won my league. So congratulations on winning your league. I'm happy you got to win.
I don't usually read that stuff, but
it's fun to give. And look, we helped them win the league.
I usually delete that stuff, but I didn't.
Okay.
No, because I appreciate the comments. It's nice to leave it in Apple. I don't want to read it necessarily on the show. It sounds like we're bragging a little bit, but
an occasional brag every once in a while isn't that bad.
It's a brag.
Okay. An occasional brag, throw it in. But more analysis on formats. Yeah, I think throughout the year you're going to get, especially as we like dig deep into the month of August and late July, you're going to get a lot. We do podcasts on non-PPR. We've done super flex stuff, and just if you want more, I would say check out the site because we have a ton of different kind of content on the editorial side, on the digital side. So, and it's all free on CBSSports.com. So we will definitely have other formats covered as we get through this.
All right, got a note here. Austin Eckler appears to be frustrated with his contract situation.
Yeah, I just saw that on Sleeper. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know what that leads to. It's like Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley. Where are they going with this? They have no leverage. Sad.
If I'm looking at some of the backup receivers out here that are still making more than me, that's going to piss me off, right? That's what he said on the Rich Eisen.
He's right. But like, what can change?
Yeah. I mean, he's always right. He's always right. Everybody's always running to the running back's defense. He's always right until it's time to pay them. And then these same people are like, how could you pay a running back?
Right.
Oh, they're so underpaid. They're so underpaid. And then they get their contract and these same people are killing the teams. How could you pay a running back? So it's a little bit hypocritical, I think, for a lot of people. But anyway, this is from Zach Vog. 12-team Superflex. I have Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, and Desmond Ridder. I also have pick 1.4 in a Superflex league. My top 3 wide receivers are Keenan Allen, Brandon Cooks, and Michael Pittman. All right, we need help there. Should I trade Dak Prescott, Keenan Allen, picks 304 and 404 for Treylon Burks and 1.6, which could be Jackson Smith and Jigba?
I mean, look, if you did this trade, like he says, I'm resetting my wide receiver room for the future. I think if you do this trade, you need to be in a spot where you are definitely playing for the future. So you are giving up on this year. And at this point, and in my opinion, you're giving up on the next few years. I'll tell you why in a second. So at this point, you would need to then, in my opinion, get rid of all your Keenan Allen type players. And that would be the first, and your Dak is in this too. The reason I would never do this trade, though, regardless of position I'm in, is I believe in Superflex formats, especially 12 teams, especially 12-team formats. Quarterbacks are absolute gold. You're going to get at least another 4 years out of Dak Prescott, in my opinion. If you give him up here, you're not getting a quarterback back at 106 unless you want to take a gamble on one of these rookies who are, in my opinion, not projected to be great fantasy spots. Desmond Ridder, to me, is at best a 1-year solution for you this year. I don't think he's even making it through this year. I think Heineke will start at least 6 games, probably more, in my opinion, because Ridder will be so bad. So now you're down to just Trevor Lawrence at quarterback and no real plan on how to get your super. And you need really, in my opinion, you hope for 3 quarterbacks in super flex 12 team. So just for me to give up Dak, I need a lot more.
Okay. This is from Ray something Jr. Dear Paul, Bernie, Aaron, and Hideki.
Rey Mysterio Jr.
Sure.
Do you get that reference?
Yeah, I know who he is. I had WCW.
I was hoping to stomp you at some point. All right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I only know from the video game. What was it like?
I just said stomp instead of stump. That was a short circuit.
The hell was the name of that video game? WCW versus.
I don't know the video game. I just used to watch like Raw and SmackDown and all that.
Pick 3 for a keeper league, 10-team Superflex PPR.
Okay.
Christian Watson in the 14th round, Ken Walker in the 8th, Deshaun Watson in the 9th, Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 7th, Trevor Lawrence in the 5th, Pacheco 16th, P. Ryan last round.
He's got a lot of fun at
the quarterbacks are such layups.
But I'm just taking Watson and Lawrence. I will say this though.
3 more.
Oh, how many do we need?
3.
The last one for me is this is interesting.
Christian Watson.
No, I'm on Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, St. Brown.
But Walker is round 8. Okay, yeah. So definitely Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Thank you, Dan. Fun weekend coming up?
No, this is a weekend of recovery, Adam. I need a long time to recover. I need to sleep for like 24 hours.
That's been pretty. Boy, wait till you have kids. All right, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Remember to go to tinyurl.com/FFT donate and bid on that podcast league spot. Remember to draft Gabe Davis in all of your leagues and have a wonderful weekend. We will talk to you on Monday.